More people are learning languages today than ever before, but less than 1 in 4 Americans say they could have a conversation in a foreign language, despite them having studied one for several years. It's not only Americans either. The world is full of language students who know things about a language but can't really understand it or use it to do anything meaningful. Why do so many people seem to fail at becoming fluent in a foreign language? That question requires a nuanced answer, but in short, the main reason people fail is because traditional language learning approaches, frankly, aren't that great. Traditional language learning most often involves following a themed lesson plan, learning vocabulary with word lists, learning grammar by doing drills, doing writing exercises and getting feedback on your writing, and engaging in conversation with other students. For example, you might begin with a themed lesson on greetings, then be asked to practice some dialogues from your textbook with another classmate. Then you might drill the vocabulary in a lesson on pronouns in preparation for an upcoming quiz. Traditional language learning somewhat succeeds at breaking a language down into tiny parts that lesson plans can be built around, and in doing so, gives teachers concrete things to test their students' knowledge on. But unfortunately, while that's convenient for teachers, this methodology isn't great for learners. Let us explain why. Perhaps the biggest problem underlying traditional language learning is the false assumption that learning a bunch of rules and vocabulary words will enable you to produce natural and correct sentences in another language. This math-like approach doesn't really work in practice though. Let me explain why. For example, let's say that you were a perfect student and memorized all of the sentence structures, grammar points, and vocabulary words in your Mandarin Chinese textbooks, just as a good student should, and that you then tried to use this knowledge to speak in Mandarin. You'd combine the words and patterns you learned from your textbooks to try and express different ideas. But when speaking to a native speaker, you'd find that they often don't understand what you're trying to say. Or when they do understand you, they tell you sound quite unnatural. But why is this? Well, this is because how ideas are expressed in different languages can be quite arbitrary, and the same idea might be expressed quite differently in 2 different languages. This means that you can't simply combine words, grammar points, and sentence patterns together in a mathematical sort of way. You need to learn how native speakers express different ideas and then express them in the same way that they do. For example, it doesn't matter if you have the vocabulary and grammatical knowledge necessary to say "it's raining heavily" in Mandarin, because Mandarin speakers don't even use the word heavily when speaking about rain. They say it rains very big. Learning a language is not simply figuring out how to map words from language A to language B. It's much more than that. Speakers of different languages structure ideas differently and use different words to express the same ideas. And because you don't spend much time in a classroom with target language content, you will never get enough exposure to it to learn how to speak in a natural way. We've stated in a few videos now that you make progress in a foreign language by consuming content and understanding messages within that content. So think about it. How many movies did you watch in Spanish class? How many books did you read? How many podcast episodes did you listen to? For most people, the answer to these questions is 0 or very few. It's no wonder that students don't make much progress in the classroom. They never really spend much time in Spanish at all. Children hear hundreds of thousands of sentences before they're 5 years old. But you may have only practiced a few thousand sentences throughout 5 years of Spanish class. It's not that students fail. It's that the vast majority of them have never spent much time doing the activities that lead to success. What students do get in the classroom is a list of words and grammatical structures to memorize. They cram rules for a test, then promptly forget those rules after it's over. They learn words, but never see those words used in comprehensible, meaningful, and interesting contexts. This kind of contextless rote memorization is very shallow. You might learn in Japanese class that the word for medicine is kusuri. The thing is, that's not all there is to know about the word kusuri. You also need to know how the word connects to other words. You drink medicine in Japanese, even if it's in a pill form. You never take medicine in Japanese, for example. The word for bath in Japanese is furo, but in Japanese, you never take a bath either. You enter a bath. Each word exists in a complex web of meanings and associations, and it's not possible to predict exactly how a word will be used just because you learned a single one of its meanings. In order to build your own model of how your target language works, you need to read and listen to many hundreds, if not thousands of hours of content. In the beginning, you might only understand a handful of messages within that content. But over time, as your listening and reading ability and vocabulary grows, you'll become able to understand target language content nearly as effortlessly as you can understand your native language. You don't get that in a classroom. Students learn too few words to do anything useful, and the words that they do learn, they almost always learn at a very shallow level. Traditional learning tends to build lessons around specific topics. For example, you might learn numbers in one unit, animals in another, and words about going to the beach in another. Again, this is convenient for lesson planning, but it is not the most intelligent way to approach learning vocabulary. The issue is that not all words are used equally often. A college-educated native speaker can passively understand around 30,000 words. But of those 30,000 words, only around 1,500 of them make up 80% of the words that are used across all forms of content in a given language. So if your goal is to quickly begin understanding your target language, then you'll make much faster progress by focusing on learning the most frequently used words first. And as we mentioned before, our Academy and Quick Start courses are precisely designed to teach you those most frequently used words. While you eventually do need to learn words like sunscreen and giraffe, these aren't the core words you need to start making sense of a language. Spending time learning them early in your learning journey, even though you won't be encountering them frequently, is not efficient at all. Another important area that many schools skip is pronunciation. Traditional approaches don't spend enough time building students' familiarity with the sound system of their target language. They quickly work through the alphabetical writing system and then jump right into greetings and self-introductions. We aren't saying that you need to take a deep dive into phonetics, but there's a lot of low-hanging fruit when it comes to pronunciation. If you're aware that your target language contains a sound that doesn't exist in your native language, or is slightly different from a sound in your native language, then you're able to focus on listening for that difference when you encounter it. If you actively listen for a sound, you'll eventually learn to reliably hear it correctly, and it'll become increasingly obvious to you how it differs from any similar sounds in your native language. This goes a long way toward developing a good accent when you do eventually begin speaking your target language. Every time you open your mouth, you'll have a good idea how you should sound, and thus become better able to self-correct your pronunciation over time. Traditional learning tries to build all 4 language learning related skills at the same time. Those skills, of course, being reading, listening, writing, and speaking. Again, this is useful in the classroom because it gives the teacher plenty of different activities to give their students. Unfortunately, this is counterproductive in terms of actually learning a language. Without a strong foundation in the vocabulary and grammar of a language, and a strong ability to understand that language, it won't be possible to build good speaking and writing skills. In other words, strong listening and reading skills are a prerequisite to strong speaking and writing skills. This isn't to say that early output is bad and to be completely discouraged, but rather to say that you won't make rapid progress with your output until you've built strong comprehension ability. If you're naturally outgoing, live in a country where your target language is spoken, or simply have an opportunity to speak your target language, go ahead. It won't hurt you, but it also won't hurt you to wait to start speaking and writing if that's what you prefer as well. Traditional learning doesn't emphasize the importance of regularly reviewing what you're learning. Reviewing in a classroom environment usually just means cramming for a test or a quiz, then moving on and focusing on the next lesson. As the weeks and months go by, without seeing the grammar points and vocabulary words you previously learned, they are usually forgotten. Forgetting is a natural and unavoidable process. We begin forgetting within hours of learning something. If we want to commit something to long-term memory, we need to convince our brain that what we learned is important. And you do this by reviewing words and grammar periodically over an extended period of time. The good news is that with modern technology, you don't need to think about what to review or when to review it. As you learn and review flashcards in Migaku Memory, the app automatically keeps track of your performance. The more often you remember something correctly, the less often you're asked to review it. The more often you forget something, the more often you're asked to review it. The result is a powerful filtering process. You waste less time reviewing things you know well and spend more of your time focusing on things that need additional practice. Whether or not you completely agree with our assessment of the faults with traditional language learning approaches, We think most of you will at least agree that traditional learning yields very poor results, especially considering that most students will take years of language classes but likely never become able to hold even a basic conversation. Many of us at Migaku were students who studied a foreign language for 4 or 5 years in school but graduated without any meaningful ability in that language. We were frustrated and certain that there was a better way, and we found it. In the next video, we'll talk about how people really learn languages. And as always, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. Otherwise, see you in the next video.